go ahead and hit our recording so we can make this session available to those that were not able to join us today. So again, I just want to welcome all of you to this session. And to get us started this morning, we are going to start with a prayer. And our opening prayer is going to be led by Lisa. So Lisa?
Yes, we're going to use a prayer from Pope John the 23rd. And so let us begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O Holy Spirit, Paraclete, perfect in us the work begun by Jesus. Enable us to continue to pray fervently in the name of the whole world. Hasten in every one of us the growth of a deep interior life. Give vigor to our apostolate, so that it may reach all peoples, all redeemed by the blood of Christ, and all belonging to him. Honoring our vocation, let no cowardly considerations disturb the claims of justice. No meanness confine the immensity of charity within the narrow bounds of petty selfishness. Let everything in us be on a grand scale, the search for truth and the devotion to it, and readiness for self-sacrifice, even to the cross and death. And may everything finally be according to your will, O Holy Spirit of love, which the Father and the Son desired to be poured out over the Church and its institutions, over each and every human soul, and over nations. Amen. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you so much. Well, welcome everybody to this session today on learning about engagement from our experts. Again, my name is Stephanie Moore, and I want to do a quick introduction of our two key speakers here today. The first is Al Winseman. You probably have heard his name or read his book. But a little bit about his background. He is a senior learning and development consultant with Gallup, and he brings his deep expertise in employment and customer engagement, executive leadership, and organizational dynamics to his consulting work with all of his Gallup clients. He came to Gallup in 2000 to create Gallup's faith practice, applying Gallup's management science of strengths, engagement, and executive leadership to faith-based organizations. He is also the author of Growing an Engaged Church, which was published by Gallup Press in 2007. And he's also co-authored Living Your Strengths, which was published by Gallup Press and is now in its third edition. And from 2000 to 2005, Al Winseman has contributed to more than 250 articles as a featured writer and content editor of the Religion and Social Trends section of Gallup's Tuesday Briefings, Gallup's online subscription and news source. I can tell you from personal experience that Al Winseman and Growing an Engaged Church has been instrumental in my own private parish, as I know it has been for a number of you on this call. And so we are so pleased to have Al Winseman with us today to share his expertise. And along with Al, we have Msgr. Bill Hanson, who, in fact, Msgr. Bill Hanson is the pastor at St. Gerard Parish, and St. Gerard's was one of the first 3 churches in the United States to apply the research and tools developed by Gallup and its Faith Practice Division in 2003. The use of this research has given parishioners specific and concrete ways to live out the U.S. Bishop's pastoral on stewardship at home and in parish and the workplace. Father Bill introduced this into his parish as part of his stewardship and sacrificial giving at St. Gerard's. And as a result, the parish has retired a $600,000 debt and has now substantial reserves for the building of a new church. Parish participation in ministry has more than quadrupled in the same time period. And last year, 38 new catechists volunteered, with 21 already signed up for this year. Over 700 parishioners have participated in small groups to learn their God-given talents through the Clifton Strength Finder and how to give time and use their talent in parish and the community. We are so thrilled to have the two of you join us today and share all that you have learned over the years in bringing engagement and strength to parish communities. So with that, I'd like to welcome both of you to this. Father Bill? Al?
Well, good morning, everyone. This is Al Winseman, and it is a pleasure to be here with you, and really looking forward to this chat today with my good friend, Msgr. Bill Hanson. Bill?
Hi, Al. Nice to be talking to you again and sharing our conversation with all those who have tuned in to Kibitz along with us. And hopefully you folks can send into the chat section or the Q&A section of this WebEx any questions you have along the way as Al and I are talking about engagement, because we're prepared for that, and we'd like to introduce your question and into the conversation in general here. So this is really pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's great to have a no, I was just going to say it's great to have a dedicated time for you and I just to visit and give us some time that we don't get very often to do this. And those of you who are going to listen in, I hope you find this as interesting as Bill and I do. It will be productive for the two of us, I know, and I hope it is for you as well.
I think probably everybody is looking at the ridiculous picture of the two of us there on the screen now. There's a little caption at the bottom. This picture is from 2005. Al came in 2004, I think it was, to an impact. Well, we had an impact session, but also we invited about 200 parishioners. Showed up for a kind of potluck supper, and Al gave a presentation to the parish at large. And the following year, we said, "How are we going to top that?" We had a costume party. We asked everybody to come dressed as their strengths, and we knew that Al, reserved soul that he is, would probably not come with a costume from Omaha. So we got him this master and commander hat that he's wearing in the picture.
and I have it on display.
There you go. Okay.
Oh, I do. I still have it. It takes up a prominent space in my office where people who come in can ask questions about it. So, and I tell them proudly the great gift that I got from my friends at St. Gerard Magella.
Yes, and that was, I mean, just as a strategy, it turned out to be a phenomenal success because, as most people know, you invite people to a costume party and they all have something else to do. But amazingly, the response was overwhelming. People were like immediately, "Oh, I could come dressed as a whatever." So we had a couple of hundred people there, and they all had these outrageous costumes on. And it was a great strength awareness event because people had occasion then to explain their costume and thus to explain how they experience their innate talent. And it was just a great event. And I'm glad you were part of it, Al.
Oh, yeah, and a couple of costumes I remember from that. And for those of you on the line who are part of Strengths Development and taken Clifton Strengths Finder, these are the themes of talent that we all have, and your top 5 are your signature themes. But a couple of the costumes I remember, one is one of your parishioners who has woo, which is winning others over, in her top 5. And she came with a placard on, you know, like a sandwich board that you see people on the street wearing, with chocolate on it, because she said there's no better way to win people over than with chocolate. So I remember that. And then also one of the individuals who had deliberative, which is kind of that troubleshooting theme. You can see everything can go wrong. Had a hard hat with a safety light on, and then wrapped himself in yellow caution tape for his deliberative. They were just amazing costumes, and really, as you think about that event, and I think about that in terms of engagement, just the way that helps drive that in for people discovering what it is that they do best, which relates, you know, with that question number 3. In my parish, I regularly have the opportunity to do what I do best. So it was a great event and a lot of fun, and I love my Master and Commander hat. And you probably couldn't see it very well there on Bill's hat, but in his crown that he's wearing, there's a light bulb up at the top of that, right?
That's right.
There was a light bulb in there for ideation.
That's right. Connectedness goes around the brim, and ideation goes up to the bulb at the top. I just couldn't figure out a way to get the bulb to light, that's all. Next time I'll do that.
Uncle Fester from the Addams Family.
That's it, that's it. Very good. Okay, well, so Al, so let's, why don't you tell them the 4 questions we're going to talk about here today.
Sure. Well, we have 4 topics we want to address around engagement, and really just kind of have a conversation. And I've got some things to share, and Father Bill has some things from his experience. But really 4 topics, and again, we want to make sure that you all have time to chime in with questions, and we're just going to discuss between the 2 of us. First of all, our first topic is clear expectations. And really, clear expectations are how to get into the game. Then second, about engagement, it's not a leap, it's not a program, but it's a process. And talking about the process of engagement, some of the things that we see and some of the things that happen with parishes that stick with this over time. Then we're going to take a look at ME25 scores, some things about one of the things that we've discovered in our years of doing this, about reading the numbers, some of the things that make a difference, and those of you who are measuring engagement or thinking about it, some of the things we've discovered about ways to look at those numbers. And then our 4th topic is measurement. And I like your Toy Story quote here, to infinity and beyond. So Buzz Lightyear strikes again.
Yes,
but so those are our 4 topics.
And you folks will notice that we put the logo of Catholic Strengths and Engagement there as a way to visually situate all this. Al and I were preparing for this the other day and talking about how all of the engagement research and tools are about cultivating the soil. Nature manages its growth on its own, really, but in good soil and with lots of sunlight and fertilizer and keeping the weeds out of the way and using good seed, we can make for a better crop. And that's why we're all really all on the phone today and sharing some of these experiences. So, okay, Al, why don't you, well, when we were talking the other day, Al, you talked about knowing the rules of the game as an experience of clear expectations. And I was talking to one of my parishioners about this, John Alexak, whom you know, and I think John may be on the call today. And he gave me a perfect example. He was playing with his grandson. And the grandson wanted to play this Skylanders. Apparently it's a very complex video game. And John said to him, he said he hated to be a disappointing grandpa, but he said, no, he said, I don't want to play that. It's too complicated, and I don't want to put the energy into learning it. So the grandson came up with a real simple, I don't know, it was Angry Game Birds or Pac-Man or something that like anybody on the street can play. And John said, okay, I'm in on this. And it reminded me of what you and I were talking about in terms of what you wanted to say about clear expectations today.
Oh, absolutely. That really makes perfect sense, because there's some games. Sometimes I'll download some apps for my tablet, and it looks like a really cool game, but the rules aren't clear. And so I fish around, and then I get frustrated. Then I don't play anymore, and I go back to Angry Birds because it's pretty simple. Launch the birds, tap your screen, hopefully watch stuff fall down. So that's basically Angry Birds. But that does make a really good point about expectations. The first question of engagement, kind of the very, very basic question of engagement within parish life is this. As a member of my parish, I know what's expected of me. And those expectations really are the rules of the game. And if you think about the rules of the game and expectations, think about it this way. Most people want to be good members of their parish. You know what I mean? I mean, most people, there are very, very few people, let me put it this way, very, very few people get up in the morning and say, how can I be a lousy member of my parish today? I really want to be a terrible member of my parish. I want to, and if I can irritate Father, that will just make my day. Now, there are a few people like that, and some of you on the line are just kind of going through the pictorial directory, putting names with faces right now because you know who these people are. But most people really, really want to be a good member of their parish, and a lot of times they don't know how. So the expectations really tell me as a parishioner, how can I be a good member of my parish? And it's like the rules of the game. The expectation is the rules of the game. And if we don't know the rules of the game, a lot of times we'll do two things. And you see this a lot. You see this a lot with preschoolers. That if they don't know the rules to a particular game and they want to play, they just make up their own. They make up their own rules, and away they go, and they play. But when we get to be adults and we don't know the rules of the game, just like John Alexak did, and I do with games that I don't know the rules of, most of the time we don't play. Because one of the things we as human beings really hate to be is embarrassed. You know, we don't want to do the wrong thing, especially if we don't know we're doing the wrong thing and somebody points it out to us. Then it's, oh my gosh, I never should have played in the first place. You know, it's kind of like I take a look at I take a look at lacrosse, and I think that looks like a really fun game to play. And if I was younger, I might have liked lacrosse. But I don't know the rules, and so so most of the time I look at lacrosse and I say, I think I'll just watch. And that's what happens in our parishes. That's what happens in our parishes, is people don't know the rules, and so they think, what, I think I'll just watch and leave everything else up to the people who do. And that's the thing about the rules of the game. It's how to get, you're exactly right on this slide. Clear expectations tell us how to get into the game.
And when we were talking about this, Al, and as you say this, I'm thinking of a perfect example of that from St. Gerard's, which is now goes all the way back to '94, even before we learned about the engagement research. And that was that when I went to the parish in '90 with another priest, Chris Heller, we were co-pastors. People were not playing the game in terms of contributing money. And Chris and I were clueless about solving that problem, because we thought, all of our liturgical spirituality was going to save the parish and the world, and we wouldn't really have to talk about money. But we found out pretty quickly that wasn't the case. And we learned about stewardship really from the Catholic Stewardship Conference, and particularly from Jerry Losi out in Seattle, who subsequently was hired by our diocese. And he did a brilliant example of exactly what you're talking about. Instead of saying to people, the Bible says you should give 10%, Jerry taught us people who are giving 0.6% of income, which is what Catholics were giving in 1990. I think it's down to 0.2% of income now. They're not going to start giving 10%. But he said, and he showed us that he developed a very simple chart which we could give out to our parishioners. You can calculate on this chart what your income is, and the ask was for 0.5% increase as a way of getting to ultimately to the biblical goal. Well, that was a whole different cup of tea. And sure enough, people signed on to that, along with, inspiration from a witness speaker and all the rest of it. But the chart, and we have given out that chart every year since 1994. And people say to me regularly, I can't believe how much money I'm giving to the church now compared to what I used to give. And they also say, I don't miss a penny of it. I'm not exactly starving. So actually, years ago, again, prior to our involvement with you and Gallup in 2002 and 2003, Chris and I said, what we really ought to do is create a take a step back to church chart and identify stages along the way so that it's really what you're talking about here. Clarify the rules, make it simple to understand. Well, we were very enthusiastic about this, and we shared it with our vicar at the time, who's now retired. And you know what his response was, predictably? Well, you don't want to give people the impression that it's okay not to go to church every Sunday. Now, of course, that was not our intention, but asking for the whole ball of wax, I think, is basically blowing up in our face. I can't tell you how many parishioners say to me, Father, if I miss a week, it's very hard to get back. And if I miss 2 weeks, I feel like I'm really sliding. And then I say, what the heck? I really can't manage this. Because as far as they're concerned, it's all or nothing. The other day, we were having a conversation about this with some parishioners, asking them, because we're going to do this take a step back to church chart. So we were asking people who are not regular churchgoers, how would this help you, or would this help you? Well, we got an overwhelmingly positive response. And one lady said, do you remember, Father, we met at the Sunoco station a year ago? And I actually do not remember that. But she said, that's why, it took me a year, but that's why I'm back now. Another guy who was born in Mexico said, whose wedding I did at St. Gerard's, oh golly, I guess about 12, 13 years ago, he said, in my growing up, he said, if you weren't there every Sunday, you were going down, baby. That was the way he put it. And he said, when I finally did come back years after the wedding and I saw you, he said, I just wanted to dive under the rug. I'm thinking, oh, my God, Father Bill's going to give me a hard time. And all you did was say hello to me. He said, boy, this is different. So we're going to try to institutionalize this. And, of course, as with all the Gallup research, any of these intuitions we get, we fit them into the overall research scheme that you guys have come up with, so that we know we're on the right track, and we know we're doing the right stuff at the right time. I mean, you can't go wrong getting back to clear expectations. So actually, the couples who were at this, the not regularly church-going or not engaged couples who were at this meeting we had the other night, they came up with two great suggestions. One of them was the automated phone call, just like the superintendent of schools does, and we actually have been working on the electronics to do that. And the other was something we did years ago, a refrigerator magnet. But this man said, on that magnet, he said, if you could tell us which of the masses, you know, that like are family masses, so it's okay for the kids to make noise, and which are the, you know, the other masses. So give us a sense, because we really don't know all that. He's really telling me I don't know the rules of the game.
Yes.
So those are a couple of...
Oh, yeah, and I'm just, you know, my ideation is kind of working overtime here with everything that you're saying, because you point out so many, I mean, you point out just exactly the 2 points at the bottom of the page here. They need to be easy to remember, and they help us feel successful. And we talk about rules. A lot of times, you know, when we think about rules and parish life, we kind of think of negatives. But I think putting into the context, reframing it in terms of rules of the game, that helps us think of that, because we all have rules of the games that we play, and the only way we can play the game is if we know the rules. And then what you do is help people get back in the game. So, for instance, you know, you don't expect. I've been you know, last night and a couple nights before watching the NBA basketball finals and thinking about basketball in my time as a coach. You've got to give the young players, you've got to help them and give them playing time and not overwhelm them, which is what we tend to do with new parishioners, people who are new to the faith, is overwhelm them with so much. But really, if we think about it in terms of we want them to be successful, then we help them be successful. So, for example, hey, you know, if you happen to miss a Sunday, come on back. We want you here, and make it feel like, you know, make it feel like we're welcoming them back, and then setting those expectations, making them easy to remember. So they don't need to be like a 3-page German sentence, which we tend to do a lot of times, but bullet points. Bullet points, then tell me, we're pretty good at, we want you to do these things, but we need to take the next step, which is, okay, so what do I do? So, for instance, we say we want you to serve. Okay, well, what's that success look like? Well, serving. So choose one community service or mission project a year to be part of. And so if we put it that way, people say, oh, well, I can do that. I want to play. This is how I play. And then using your example of take a step, we just encourage people to take a step further. You know, what extra are you going to do this next year? And then by the time as you pointed out with the giving piece, by the time, you know, 5-6 years go by, you say, wow, I can't believe what I'm giving compared to what I was, and it wasn't that hard.
It wasn't.
Love it.
And some of our questioners, or some of our participants, Al, are asking about this Take a Step chart and where can I get this. So for those of you who are listening, I promise that I will post the Take a Step chart for stewardship on our website, on the CSEC website. And as we develop at St. Gerard's, as we develop our Take a Step to Church chart, I'll put that on too. We'll create a library around that so that all of you can get a copy of that. And
excellent.
And as far as well, back to the rules of the game thing, just briefly, Al, you'll recall this, how in order to get our congregation familiar with the language of the 12 items of engagement, we order the little books, the little black books from the Diocese of it's in Detroit.
Saginaw, isn't it? Yeah.
That's right, Saginaw. Bishop Unterner wrote those, and they're continuing the tradition. And we give them out every year. They're immensely popular. But as you recall, we created a personal engagement chart that we put in the book so that people could measure their own engagement at the beginning of Lent. They've had choices of things to do for Lent, and then measure their engagement at the end. And now we did it really because we wanted people to get familiar with the language of engagement, but it was also a great way to help them know the rules of the game.
Oh, yes. Excellent. Yeah. Any of those kinds of things you can do to kind of make it practical and give people tactics so they can feel successful. That's really important pieces because, again, from what I said earlier, people want to be successful as members of their parish, and so this is how you can be successful.
Yeah. And I think this is leading right into our next topic here, Al, which is about the leap, not a leap, but a process. So talk to us about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, some of the things when we look at engagement is that we've noticed when we look at, we've got the three types of members. We've got engaged members who are involved in, committed to, and enthusiastic about their parish. They're the ones who give more, serve more, invite more. They're the ones that you want more of. Then you've got the not engaged parishioners who are happy with their parish, but their connection is more social than spiritual. They do that minimal amount of volunteering. They do some. They give moderately, but they like their parish. And then you got your actively disengaged, kind of the two types: the apathetic, who you don't see very often. Then you also have the cave dwellers, consistently against virtually everything. And one of the things that we see in this process is when you start focusing on engagement, you'll see if we focus on this, and we'll be talking about this a little bit later this morning, this morning or afternoon, because we do have some folks who are on Atlantic time. But people don't jump from being actively disengaged to engaged. It's a process. They move from being actively disengaged to not engaged to engaged when they move, if and when they move. So, for example, and what happens with the actively disengaged is that the way that they move out of their active disengagement is really kind of counterintuitive. It's by not solving their problems. They move from their relationships that they have with other people who are becoming more engaged within the parish. And the way that you deal with active disengagement is focus on those things, those items, those strategies that will drive engagement further. Because there may be myriad issues that the actively disengaged have, but at their root are items of engagement. So what happens is a lot of times you'll have an actively disengaged parishioner. Let's just say it's the apathetic variety who doesn't come very often, and typically they'll have friends in the parish who are not engaged. They attend regularly, but they're not fanatics or anything. They like getting together, and sometimes they'll start noticing a change in these formerly not engaged parishioners as they start talking more positively about their parish, about things that they're doing. And because they know and trust these individuals, the actively disengaged will start to think, maybe I should give the parish a chance because this person I like, who I have a good relationship with, and I trust, they've got a positive relation. They're speaking more positively about their parish, and they seem to be excited about things, so they give it a try. Yeah. But then you've got your cave dwellers, and a lot of times they'll find that they've got a welcoming ear, because your not engaged parishioners we need to remember, are very vulnerable, depending upon who they listen to.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times your actively disengaged will corner one of them and find a listening ear when they say, hey, let me tell you what's really going on at the parish. But as the not engaged are becoming more engaged, the not engaged become more engaged, they start challenging what the actively disengaged are saying. And they'll say, well, wait a minute, that's not what I see happening. And those cave dweller actively disengaged parishioners will do one of two things. They'll either say, well, maybe I should take another look at things. Maybe because this person who I trust has a little different view, maybe I should open my mind a little bit. Or they say, maybe I should just be quiet. Either one is good.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then they move, they move from being actively disengaged to being not engaged and then move to being engaged. So a lot of times you will see for those parishes who are just starting engagement, and I think that we've talked about this in the early days of St. Gerard, is as engagement grows and active disengagement goes down, that not engaged percentage, at least in the first few years, tends to stay pretty static. Because that is a pass-through, that's kind of your pass-through category. People pass from being actively disengaged to not engaged and engaged. So it really is a process that you need to start, looking at this as a process through which people go. I know I've gone on and on about this, but you asked.
Well, no, because you see, as I'm sure is true of everybody who's on the call today, and I understand from Stephanie that we have close to 100 people. We have 95% attendance, so to speak, at least of those who volunteered. That means there's a lot of interest in this. But as you're talking, I'm sure all of us listening are thinking of circumstances. You're describing stuff that I've seen or see go on at St. Gerard's on a daily basis. And it's as is the case with all of the Gallup research, it has helped me to understand Catholic theology and the Bible so much better, because this whole idea that the church is the sacrament of salvation, or the sacramentum mundi, the sacrament of the world, so that when I remember, Al, I'm sure you do too, the very first impact session ever after the inaugural summit, we all came down to Washington, and because there were 120 pastors at the first summit, and you said we could all bring 5 people with us, Chris and I came down with 5 people from the staff, and we just thought there was going to be a mob scene at Gallup, Washington. And we kept saying, how are they going to fit everybody in? This is going to be incredible. And we get there, and it's you, me, Chris, Rodney Plunkett from Broadway Church in was that Lubbock?
Lubbock. Yeah, it was in Lubbock.
And also the gang from St. Andrew's in Omaha, St. Andrew's Methodist. And I remember saying to you, Al, where is everybody? And you said to me, I'll never forget it, oh, you Catholics, you think you can just announce something in your parish and everybody will come. He said, these Protestant folks have to go home, and they've got to get their vestry on board, and they have to talk to the deacons, and it's going to take them a while to come together around this. And then you said something that shocked all of us, because we wanted to know about those people who strongly disagree, those people who answer 1 on the survey. How do we get them moving? And you said, ignore them. And I remember all of us, Protestant and Catholic, looking at each other and saying, these Gallup people are nuts. But you talked about critical mass, and you said you aren't going to move those people. It's the engaged, it's the 5s who are going to move the 4s, who are going to move the 3s, etc. I don't think any of us actually believed you at that point. But, we went home and did what we were told, and by George, it is exactly what happened. And the cranks started to be quiet, and many of them did leave right off the bat. And some of them have returned, and a number of them have stayed in the not engaged pool, and some of them have actually come out and become extremely engaged. And I recall, and I put this at the bottom of the slide, Al, because I know it's not how the survey reads, but I remember you saying something that I never forgot, and that is that 4 is really the midpoint. and that it takes as much energy to get from 1 to 4 as it does to get from 4 to 5. And that's why you're recommending that we put our primary energy into the strongly agree crowd, the engaged crowd, because that thing they share together, there's where the statement that the church is the instrument of salvation or the sacrament of salvation, that's where that makes sense to me, because I see things happening around me, and I know I'm not doing it. It's this whole that is greater than the sum of its parts among the engaged people that just, it's like a magnet, and it draws people toward them. And well, as you know, we had the wonderful experience at St. Gerard's of learning that there was a meeting, a civic meeting, over which we had no involvement except that some of our parishioners were part of the civic group. They were doing a study to consider becoming a hamlet, a legal designation in the state of New York. And so everybody who represents the community was at this series of meetings. And one of my ushers said to me, "Oh, Father, you would have loved what they said last night." When the facilitator who was hired by the Civic Association said, "Where are the centers of life in Port Jefferson Station, Terryville?" He said the entire group agreed there were 3 places: the library, the high school, and St. Gerard Majella. Well, I almost fell off my chair. We certainly were never out to influence the community at large, you know, but there it was. The community at large was recognizing that we were a center of life, which meant that we had a pretty high proportion of engaged members.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I tell that story just about everywhere I go. And really, if you think about it, of what we are supposed to be in terms of the church being the salt and light in the world, to have your parish be described as one of the centers of life in the community, man, that really, to me, that is the goal of being an engaged parish, is that what we do makes a difference in the community, and even those who are not officially registered as members of the parish see the parish as a center of life in the community. That's just incredible.
I think, thank you very much, Al. I think that, to go back to what you said about relationships, that people who are not engaged or people who are actively disengaged, they're drawn by relationships along this growth process. I think that one of the things that has really helped us to intensify this is, again, something we've borrowed from sacrificial giving, and in learning about how to do witness talks. And I remember it was Dutch and Barbara Schultz from down in Florida came to the Diocese of Brooklyn in '93, and I brought some parishioners in to hear them. And apart from all the stuff about financial stewardship, I was also paying attention to their process, because it was a process of trying to engage people more. And they had a 4-step process for doing witness talks. And we have used it for almost 20 years, and it works like a charm, and we've certainly used it to spread engagement. So we give 4 opening sentences. I can't claim any credit to this, and in fact, I think Barbara Schultz told me that they stole it from somebody else so long ago they can't even remember who. But in any case, we give 4 sentence starters to somebody we invite to be a witness. So in this case, I first heard about engagement in my parish when, and they talk about a specific circumstance. My negative reaction was, and it's got to be a negative reaction to be real, because people who are out there who are not engaged or who are actively disengaged, they are negative, and they want to hear somebody talk in their language. 3, what changed my mind, and here's where the conversion takes place, here's where the relationship changes, because the person is telling a personal story about their mind and heart moving. And then the 4th, how this engagement has benefited my life, or how, you know, sacrificial giving has benefited my life, or how doing this particular ministry, or how going to Holy Week has benefited my life. We use this for all kinds of things. But, you know, it's kind of like bringing the clear expectations into it, because it clearly outlines 4 steps from, I was where you folks are, not buying any of this, and this is what happened to change my mind, and now I'm into it, and this is what's what's going on. And whenever we do those things, we always have something going on in the lobby where people can go out to sign up for something where they can learn more. Not a commitment, but just they can find out to learn more. And that very simple process allows the personal story of individual people to directly affect that critical mass factor, growing the critical mass factor in the parish as a whole.
Yeah, I hope, and this is such an important point, and I want to go through these 4 steps again because we had a question about it, but I also want to go through it because, Father Bill, I want you to know that I'm spreading this word whenever I do it in a lot of different settings, not just with parishes that I work with, but also with my more secular clients when they're talking about how do we kind of manage change in our organization. And I tell them these 4 things, just a 2-minute, first of all, is I first heard about whatever it is. Here we're talking about engagement when. And the second part is my negative reaction was. And number 3 is what changed my mind was. And number 4, here's the difference that it's made. So, and I see you're typing this in to all participants, but it's really, really, I love this, and it's a 2-minute life change speech, if you will. And a lot of parishes are wanting to know how do we incorporate witness talks, because what I've found with all the parishes and Protestant congregations that I've worked with, nothing is more powerful than hearing from people like me. Because I expect Father, I expect the pastor, I expect the quote-unquote trained professionals to tell me how important this is, but I want to hear from somebody like me. And that makes in anything, those witness talks are just huge.
And this 4-step process, whoever created this, it focuses the person who's the witness. So all they have to do is fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
And you know, I've never heard one that wasn't like outstanding, and people don't even have to be like particularly literary, because it just gives them a format to tell their story, and it's a story of conversion, really.
Oh, yeah, and I've done, when I would do this when I was a full-time pastor and have these kinds of talks, and if I'd have had this, this 4-step process, I'd have been brilliant. But I'd ask them to do a witness talk.
You'd be the Pope by now, Al.
I'd be the Pope by now, yes. Well, we'd have to do a few other things first, but, you know.
Minor details.
Minor details. But what would happen is after a witness talk like this, and just, 1 or 2 minutes, I could have just said, okay, we're done now. We can all go home because we've all heard the gospel right here in what they've said. I love these, and you give such a succinct, which gets back to what we talked about earlier, what you just mentioned, the expectations. I can give a successful witness talk because you've told me how to do it. Oh, yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. Now, I'm moving on to the next slide because I think we're really pretty much already there. And I think that your clarification on this will be tremendously helpful to all of us, because you, as is true of all things Gallup, you can put it in terms of numbers. This critical mass, this influence, this leverage that the engaged have on all others, you've really got this down to the numbers, so give it to us, Al.
Okay. Well, early on, and we've been doing this now for about a decade with measuring engagement, we started looking at kind of the critical mass for engagement at right around 39%. Between like 39 and 42%, when you got your engaged, that kind of became critical mass where you started to see things happen. And that's an important percentage to get to. But what we found is even more important is what we call the neutralization ratio. And that is the ratio of engaged to actively disengaged, okay? In other words, it takes 4 engaged parishioners to counteract the negative effects of 1 actively disengaged parishioner. So when we're working on engagement and we're working on kind of measuring and putting together the strategies and tactics to drive engagement, it's also critically important to drive active disengagement down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and so let's think about it this way. Let's think about it in kind of two scenarios. Why this neutralization ratio is important and what it means. Let's think about the folks in the middle, the guy in the hammock there, the not engaged parishioner who's just kind of showing up.
Yeah.
Remember, they're vulnerable depending upon who they listen to.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are, let's say, where most parishes start is kind of a 1-to-1 ratio. You generally have 25 to 27% engaged and anywhere between 23 to 29% actively disengaged. So it's about 1-to-1. And what that means is your non-engaged parishioner has an even chance of, it's just as likely that I can be talking to an engaged parishioner as an actively disengaged parishioner. And think about the difference that makes. If I'm vulnerable, depending upon whom I listen to, that my odds are about the same of running into somebody actively disengaged as engaged. So think what happens then if you get to 4-to-1, the chances of me meeting and talking to an engaged parishioner, I'm probably going to run into 3 or 4 engaged parishioners before I even talk to an actively disengaged parishioner.
Yeah.
So you think about that with those not engaged. Now let's take it another step, which I think is just as important and in some circumstances more important for evangelization. And let me ask you this. I'm going to ask you, Father Bill, what place do you like to go in and do shopping? You know, I mean, do you go to like Home Depot or the supermarket? Just think of what's a store? Mm-hmm. So if you go,
I like Lowe's myself.
Okay, so you're a Lowe's guy. Okay, so you go into Lowe's. Can you tell if you so you go into Lowe's and you need some help? And if you're like me, you need to find somebody and ask for help because you're not quite sure what you kind of know what you're looking for, but not quite sure. So you find someone to ask. Can you tell if you have run into an engaged clerk or an actively disengaged clerk?
Oh my Lord! It's like a neon sign goes off.
Absolutely. And what does that do when you run into an actively disengaged clerk? What's that do to your experience?
Well, I was in CVS the other day, and I said, "Where are the wristbands for watches?" And the guy says to me, he's got the uniform. He says, "I can't find them either," and walks away. So I left.
I can't find them either. Okay. Okay, so
I said to myself, CVS is not a Gallup client. I can see that.
Oh, I can't find them either. Okay. So,
seriously,
okay, now
Al, I left the store. I just walked out. I said, forget this.
And you went somewhere else where you could get help, right?
I got them in Kohl's, as a matter of fact.
So you went to Kohl's. Okay, so we've all had that experience, everybody on the line. Okay, think about that if somebody knew a first-time visitor to your parish. And if they run into an actively disengaged parishioner, if their chances of meeting an engaged parishioner and an actively disengaged parishioner are about the same, you're leaving a lot to chance there. And what's going to happen to their experience and what that's going to do to their perception of the parish. So if you grow engagement and you've got that 4-to-1 ratio, if I'm a new parishioner coming in for the first time and I'm going to meet 3 or 4 engaged parishioners before I have an opportunity to meet an actively disengaged parishioner, what's that going to do to my experience? That's why we look at that ratio. So what's that mean? So, for example, if you go from, let's just say you're 25% engaged, 29% actively disengaged, and and that's kind of your level set, your benchmark. Then you come back a year later, you've done some things to work on engagement, and engagement goes to 36%, and active disengagement goes from 29%, it goes down to 20%. Now you're at about 1.5-to-1. And then you come back a year later, and engagement, let's just say engagement hasn't budged. It's at 36%. But active disengagement has gone down to 9%. there's your 4 to 1.
Yeah.
Now, that makes things easier because your momentum is driving that position. So what we want to do is we want to drive down active disengagement at the same time as driving engagement, because that's pretty critical.
I think I find this so helpful because you get an annual number for the 3 categories, and this way of looking at it as a proportion is something that I don't know. It gives me. I feel like now it gives me a better tool for the in-between times. I'd have to wait for a whole year. Not that I'm going to get another measurement, but that I'm conscious of the fact that it's not just the number of one lumped group of people, but it's their relationship to the other. It helps me to see much more of the dynamism of this. Oh, and by the way, one of our listeners pointed out that I have a misspelling here. If you notice on the slide, Al, I've got actively engaged on the right, and it should be actively disengaged. I've sent a little note to all participants on that, so we'll correct that slide before it goes on. But I think we, given the wrecking ball in the illustration, I think it's pretty obvious what we mean there. He wants to knock all those chimneys over.
That's exactly right. Oh, and another thing too. Now that we're, because some of the folks on the line may be asking. I don't see it in the chat, but I know some of you are asking. Okay, so how do we drive down active disengagement?
Right.
What do we do? Well, we've got 12 items of engagement, right? And when we look at those 12 items of engagement, one of the things that we know from our further research now is how important questions 1 through 6 are. Question 1. I know what's expected of me. Question 2, my spiritual needs are met in my parish. Question 3, I have the opportunity to do what I do best. Question 4, I received recognition or praise in the last month. Question 5, the spiritual leaders care about me as a person. And question number 6, there's someone who encourages my spiritual development. Those 6 questions are really the key questions to driving down active disengagement. And what we found with those 6 questions, questions 1 through 6 drive questions 7 through 12, and never the other way around. So what that means, in other words, is if I put together some strategies and tactics to address maybe question number 3, I get to do what I do best, and question number 1, I know the expectations. There is a secondary effect on questions 7 through 12, and that's what we did an analysis of this and said if you focus your attention on questions 1 through 6, they also will improve performance on questions 7 through 12. But if your primary focus is on questions 7 through 12, it doesn't have the same effect on questions 1 through 6. And here's an example. There was a particular parish a few years ago who decided to focus on their attention on question number 8. The mission or purpose of my parish makes me feel my participation is important. And they said, that's a good one. We're going to work on that and get a mission statement. So they started, their engagement was at 24%, and active disengagement was 29%. Okay, so they had some issues. So they decided to work on that. They came back a year later, and engagement had gone to 36%. Now, we say that's really good movement. That's 12 percentage points. That's a 50% increase in engagement. But active disengagement didn't budge. It was still at 29%. And if 29%, or almost a third of your parishioners, are actively disengaged, that is a very precarious foundation upon which to build your engagement. And they wound up with some issues, of the actively disengaged. But if you focus on questions 1 through 6 and drive down that active disengagement and create that space, creating that gap between the engaged and actively disengaged, seeing the engaged grow and active disengagement go down, that really helps drive the spiritual health of the parish. So, as we start even getting more granular, looking at, okay, if we really want to look at what's going to do it for us, questions 1 through 6 are the ones.
Yes, and I can recall, Al, from the original summit, the inaugural summit back in 2003. I remember being in that sea of people before we got to know each other personally. I remember raising my hand and asking you, Does it matter? Is the order of these things important? And your answer was like, you lit up like a Roman candle, and you said, "Oh, absolutely." And I thought, "Oh, I think I've touched on something here." But you know, that's so helpful because long before Gallup, when I started in 1990 with Chris Heller, people wanted to have, like, you know, Bible studies and all these kind of question 12, 11 and 12 areas, you know, learn and grow stuff. And we just knew intuitively this more basic stuff has to go on here than that. And boy, people were annoyed at us. But of course, we found out later they were all actively disengaged, you know. So not only having this research from Gallup, but knowing the order in which you should be doing it is so very, very helpful.
Absolutely.
I think it's probably therefore time to come to our last question about measurement. And this is, well, you know, I am quoting Buzz Lightyear here, Infinity and Beyond.
Which is a good quote.
I must say, I never expected that all this very practical measuring stuff was going to make all that can happen beyond measurement clearer. And it remains a mystery to me. So,
yes, well,
talk to us.
Okay, and then I'm going to let you talk because you've got the great stories. And actually, this is your quote, and I use it, not to infinity and beyond. That's I think that's Steven Spielberg. But but this one at the bottom, and this I say this all the time because this is, I mean, this is a question that people have. This seems pretty formulaic. What's going on here? The more we pay attention to the things that we can measure, the more we experience the things we cannot. And if you think about what we're doing in growing engaged parishes, it's really like the parable of the sower and the seed, and that you've depicted so aptly in the very first diagram of the sower and the seed. The sower goes out to sow some seed, and some falls along the path, the rocks, the thorns, and the good soil. And that fell among the good soil produces fruit, 30, 60, 100-fold. When you think about it, what we're doing with measuring engagement and really kind of drilling down and seeing the Gallup research and the science around it is preparing the soil, just like farmers and gardeners have done for centuries. But the more, because we know that good soil produces better crops, right? And produces better plants and herbs and vegetables and flowers and all of those things in our gardens and all of those things on the farm. But that does not at all explain the mystery of how a seed comes to life. And that's where the Holy Spirit is involved. And we know that some seeds, if they're planted in bad soil, stay dormant until the soil conditions are right. And that's what we mean about the things that we can measure, measuring engagement, measuring all of the things that are important around engagement and looking at the things that make the difference and paying attention to those. That helps, that we're doing our part to create the soil conditions so that the seed can grow and we experience the things we cannot. And what I've seen in those parishes where they've seen engagement grow, oh my gosh, the things they experienced that they never dreamed of, that they never dreamed could happen because they paid attention to the things that they could measure.
Yes. And you know, the gardening image is so apt because we're all involved in that in some way or another, even if just with a house plant. But if the garden isn't attended to, the weeds take over, and you can't see the growth of the plant. You can see the growth of all this other stuff. I know that one of our parishioners had a remarkable experience, which he couldn't wait to tell me about when he got home from work, and it happened to be Holy Thursday a couple of years ago. He's got a business measuring closets and doing exotic, he'll put shelves and cabinets, whatever. Clever closets. So Frank is measuring a house in another county, and the woman of the house says to him, Frank, are you a man of God? Frank, who's kind of right out of The Sopranos, says, well, I like to think so. He says to me, Father, I got my ruler and my shirt here, my Clever Closet shirt. What is she asking me about? Am I a man of God? So she said, I have a feeling about you, Frank. She said, and so she asked him if he would say a prayer over her son, who was 5 years old, and autistic and had never spoken in his entire 5-year lifespan. So Frank said, yeah, sure, I'll say a prayer. Now, I know Frank pretty well, and we've had some private conversations, and I do know, he's kind of told me his whole history of his relationship with God, which kind of woke up personally when he was about 12. So Frank goes with Mrs. Wright and into the kid's bedroom, and his little brother is there, and I think her sister or somebody was home. And so Frank makes up a prayer, and this is the part I love. Frank says to me, Father, it was the strangest thing, but while I'm saying this prayer in this kid's room with his family, I felt like I was at the 9 o'clock Mass on Sunday, and all the parishioners were standing around me. And he was completely surprised by that. And when I told this story the following Easter that year, one of the other parishioners said, gee, it sounds like the Verizon commercial, you know, where any one of us goes in the Verizon network, there's 300 people standing behind you. And I thought, what a great definition of the church.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Bottom line, Frank has this experience of all the parishioners being with him, giving this blessing, and he promises to light a candle for the little boy because he makes a visit to church during the week in addition to going to Mass on Sunday. So the following, and he happened to mention that he does this on Tuesday. The following Tuesday, didn't the boy's mother call him up and say, Frank, did you light that candle today? And he said, yes, as a matter of fact, I just got back from church. And she says, I know, because today he said his first word, Mom. And it began a relationship between the family and the whole parish, really. We get a Christmas card from them every year learning about Wesley's progress, which has been very positive, not without its difficulties. And you know, to me, this is just one of these amazing fruits of engagement eye has not seen nor has ear heard. You know, we just try to keep the garden neat and, you know, prune the stuff every now and then or whatever, and then all this other stuff happens, which is like, you know, jaw-dropping.
Oh my gosh! And I don't know how many dry eyes are left there on the webinar with us, but that is, I mean, and that's really that's why I do what I do. That's why I've spent the last decade doing this and helping parishes measure their engagement. It's for all of these things. It's the stories like this. It's the transformation that happens. It is all the things that we experience that we can't measure because we're paying attention to the things we can. Oh, man. I love hearing those stories. Go ahead.
Well, I was saying, Al, you probably noticed that Laurent Fournier, who's from Canada, asked the question, if in the 4-to-1 proportion do the ones feel ganged up on by the 4? And I think this is really what we're talking about here in the beyond measurement and beyond. This whole moving of hearts and changing of hearts is really God's business, and it takes place in a way that's, in a weird way, independent of our measuring and our disciplining and gardening and all the rest of it. Because, you know, like that wonderful phrase, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That whole or wholeness or holiness that takes place doesn't feel, it feels powerful, it feels awesome, it feels like, oh my Lord, what's going on here? But it doesn't feel like being ganged up on, because I think people, any one of us, and I believe there's an actively disengaged dimension to every one of us, no matter how engaged we may be. When we feel that movement happening, yeah, it's powerful, but it's not coercive. Our freedom is always there. And I've also noticed that, you know, we from the beginning, we publicly post people's pictures and their top 5 themes of talent. And people have said to me, well, do people like feel, you know, pushed into that? And I said, no one has ever said that to me. No one has ever said, oh, God, you're pushing this down my throat. Nobody ever said that. What people have said is, oh, you know, I've wanted to do this, and oh, I'm glad we're doing it again because now I think I'm ready. It's amazing. It's again one of those things that's really beyond words to describe. But I think the question is good because the question that Laurent asked about, you know, is this coercive, whatever. Really, when engagement gets going and the whole that is greater than the sum of its parts emerges, well, of course, I have connectedness, number one, so I would say it this way. You feel the hand of God It's gentle, but it's not fooling around either.
That's right. Well, and it really is about the work of the Holy Spirit, isn't it? I mean, and it is that you kind of, it's one of those things that you know when you're there, you can feel it, and I love that image that you brought for us of the parish goes with you wherever you are, because it is just ecclesiologically sound, right, from a Catholic perspective, that it is the church.
Yes.
It's salvation through the church, and when we are engaged, our parish, and not just some abstract notion of parish, but parish as the faces and the people are with us. And that image of, I felt when I was praying that it was the 9 o'clock Mass and everybody was there. Oh, wow. That's, yeah.
I have been a big fan of N.T. Wright, the Anglican, former Anglican Bishop of Durham, and just wonderful scripture scholar. I've read practically everything he's written, and he was recently on Long Island, spoke at my seminary, so I made a beeline with a bunch of folks from the parish up to hear him do amazingly in 1 hour. He summarized his latest book, which I'm recommending to everybody here on our call today, How God Became King, the Forgotten Story of the Gospels, so to speak. And it's really right on to me, it's the biblical exegesis behind engagement. He, of course, doesn't use that word, and I don't think he knows about this research. But he's really pointing out in this book, and really in a sense is what all of his writings are about, that creation and God's initial plan so that things would be on earth as they are in heaven, creation got messed up by Adam and Eve, and so Abraham and his descendants were called to help put the whole world back on track, and they got off track. So the Messiah, the promised Messiah, came, and he and his followers were the completion of the promise. And that this theme that runs through this is very much about, it's an engaged community of believers who are the instrument of bringing God's original plan, or God's new creation, which we call heaven, from the age to come forward into the present age, this age, and that it's here to begin to be experienced as the kingdom. And having all this experience about engagement and measuring engagement, and especially talking about the things that we experience that are beyond measurement, reading N.T. Wright, because everything he writes ultimately is connected back to this main theme, but this particular book, How God Became King, helps me to see, I understand what he's saying far more clearly because of the engagement experiences that I've had putting your research, you guys' research, into practical terms. I mean, what you know as research came from, your study of just people all over the country anyway, so it came out of us. You gave it that unique perspective and gave it back to us as tools. And, you get this question probably more than anybody, Al. How Catholic? Is this stuff Catholic? Is this stuff biblical? Well, boy, without necessarily knowing anything about Gallup research, N.T. Wright has certainly demonstrated that it is the core of biblical experience.
Yes, and that's it, and really it is about, bottom line, relationships and community. I mean, that's the core, and then out of that grows the transformation of the world. And that's kind of my connectedness, futuristic working there, Father Bill, is the transformation of the world. If you're going to have a dream, might as well be a big one, right?
That's right.
Oh,
that is for sure.
Good.
Well, I guess we have, I'm getting a signal here that we have, I guess, about 10 minutes for questions. So let's see what we have. Oh, we have lots of questions. Let's see now. Okay, Okay, some of these questions are practical about how to get in touch with the 12 items.
And that is, yes, looking at the 12 items of where they are in growing engaged church, and also being part of, here's a question.
Yeah.
How important is continued membership of the pastor and key church leaders to the continued growth of engagement in parish community? That's a good question. Why don't I give some thoughts, and then you can follow up, Bill, from your experience. In some sense, okay, I'm going to give you, and again, one of my themes is strategic, so here is a really good strategic answer, and that is, it depends. And it depends upon the engagement level and the commitment of the pastor and key leaders, okay? Because if they're not committed to this and they don't have to drive everything, but they have to be committed and understand it, then a change in leadership to those who do understand it is a good thing. But that continuity, and you can speak to this from your experience with continuity, continuity of key leaders, key lay leadership, and pastor and staff who understand and really are committed to the principles of engagement, I think can be very important for leadership, for the path of the parish. The other thing too is that once engagement gets to a certain point, and you get when you get to the ratio, if you get like to 5-to-1s or a 6-to-1 ratio, it kind of takes on a life of its own, and it will not be denied.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I sadly, as probably some of us all have seen, parishes that were gung-ho in this, change of pastor can kill it if he thinks it's all nonsense and doesn't want any part of it. But one thing I've discovered about my experience of doing this is that this is about something that's deeply objective. This is way beyond personality cult. In fact, when I was out in Seattle 3 years ago, one of the parishioners who was at the workshop, it was, workshops introducing it to them, he said to me he'd like to come and visit St. Gerard's, and he flew at his own expense 3,000 miles across the country, and he happened to come on our feast day weekend. And we had a real nice time. We put him to work, and it was a really great, wonderful, friendly man. So I was back in Seattle the following year, or maybe it was the year after, and he got up to give a little witness talk. One of the things we do in the training there with the folks in Seattle is practicing that witness talk outline. So he got up to give his witness talk. He was voted by his table the best witness talk. And I'm listening to this, and he says, well, when I first heard Father Bill talk about this, I thought this was a little too good to be true, and maybe the whole thing is just a personality cult around him. Well, he never told me that when he came to visit St. Gerard's, So he proceeds to say, well, I went out there to see for myself, because I wasn't going to put any energy into this if it was just a personality cult. And he says, I'm happy to say that it isn't, because I went to St. Gerard's, and they're all crazy like he is. So, from a deli owner, that's a rave. Yeah. So in answer to that question, there's something so objective here that even, who knows, it may be the engaged congregation that converts the new pastor when he comes. There was a question here earlier, too, Al, about the role that strength plays in this. And
why don't you go ahead with that? Absolutely.
Let me begin that and then kick it back to you.
Okay.
On page 272 of How God Became King, N.T. Wright has this remarkable sentence in which he says, if you belong to Jesus, the Messiah, if his spirit lives in you, if you are a worshiper of the one true God, maker of heaven and earth, then, however you may feel at the moment, whether you are sick or healthy, handsome or jaded, you are simply a shadow of your future self. I thought, wow, it's the strength thing. And the strength research helps people to get some light in the shadow of their future self. Because I would say, to use his and scriptural terminology, when people do StrengthsFinder, they discover what God is doing on earth as it is in heaven in terms of them. Laurent Fournier had asked a question here earlier about the seed. Is the seed God's grace in us, or are we the seed? And I think the answer is both. That God's self-expression becomes each of us, and I can't imagine a more powerful, practical tool than StrengthsFinder, which I call personally GraceFinder. Sanctifying GraceFinder. And as you've often said, it's number 3, doing what I do best, using strength is the super glue of engagement. So on that note, let me kick it back over to you for the statistical stuff.
Yes, and what we find, and that's such a great, I think, a theological and biblical underpinning for strengths development. I like it, GraceFinder. But strengths really does tie in with question number 3. In my parish, I regularly have the opportunity to do what I do best, and that particular question. A lot of people say no to that because one of the reasons is I don't know what I do best. I have all these voices telling me what I don't do and all of my deficiencies, but what is it that I do? And a lot of times, and you may have heard this, Father Bill, and those of you on the line, oh, Father, I want to do something, I want to volunteer and do something, but I don't really have any talent, so just put me somewhere. So what we want to do with StrengthsFinder is this helps you find an area to serve based on who you are rather than who you are not, and finding the thing that really excites you about mission and ministry and serving, and regularly having the opportunity to do what you do best based upon your talents and strengths rather than some image that you have or something somebody is telling you. It's based on who you are. And statistically, what we find is this, is that individuals who, and we pulled out, we did a sample of this. We did it with a random sample, but we did three separate parishes, and we pulled out the people who strongly agreed that they get to do what they do best, and we looked at their engagement level. And those who strongly agree, I have the opportunity to do what I do best, of those who said that, between 65 and 76% were engaged, and only 1 and 2% were actively disengaged. So, I mean, you take a look at that, that's about a 75-to-1 ratio. So, of course, that's really kind of the supercharger for engagement.
Yeah. And from a individual parishioner interest level, it's very grabbing. Measuring engagement for the whole community is something I think that tends to appeal more to administrative types and people who are running programs or whatnot. The results of increased engagement, everybody feels it, but the actual inner workings is not quite as much of a grabber as somebody learning their top 5 themes of talent.
Oh, yeah.
That's definitely a winner.
Well, it looks to me like we've got a number of questions, and I think we can probably, I don't think we can deal with the rest of these questions now in the time that we have left because we need to turn things back over to our host. But we've got, we want to thank everybody for your time. And again, if you've got questions, again, if you go to the Catholic Strengths and Engagement site, there are chat opportunities and opportunities to get questions answered. And we've got the leadership within there, within Catholic Strengths and Engagement can make that, can answer a lot of those questions and also send those on. So, Bill, this has been fun.
Yes, it's totally enjoyable, Al. I can't believe almost an hour and a half has gone by. It's like, wow.
I know. Yeah, I know. It's. I hope the rest of you on the line for this have had as much fun as we have, and maybe have learned something along the way. I always learn something, and I'm inspired whenever we get together and share time. So it's been a pleasure, and it's just been great to get to visit about some important things.
Great to hear your voice again, Al, and hope to see you again soon.
Yes, we'll look forward to it.
Okay. Well, and thank you both so much for all of your incredible wisdom and also your enthusiasm for helping to build the church, helping to build the body of Christ. It's been inspiring to listen to both of you, and I think it's good for all of us to hear the joy that both of you exude as you're talking about the process of building engagement in our parishes. And so thank you to both of you and to all of you who have participated. We did have a number of questions that we didn't have the opportunity to address. I want to make sure that all of you realize that Catholic Strengths and Engagement Connected Community site is a place where you can go to pose your questions, to share your experiences and what's happening in your parishes, and to learn from each other. It really is intended to be an interactive site. And we don't know if many of you realize that not only are the links for the recordings for these webinars on the site, but as people share their questions and their discussions and their blog postings and all of their documents, those are all stored in libraries. And so you have the opportunity to go and to see what Father Bill and what Don Garbison and what Stephanie Moore and all of their parishes are doing, and so many other parishes. We have whole groups of parishes in a number of dioceses in the United States and Canada that are working with these processes, and many of them are sharing things readily on the site. So please go to the CSEC site and share that with your colleagues and your friends in your parishes and your diocese. Anyone can join, and as you know, there is no charge for being a member of CSEC, and we want to continue to grow this community because we know the power and the potential of sharing our experiences together as we continue to learn about this in all of our different situations. We wanted especially to mention many folks had some kind of practical questions about, for instance, the 4 questions that Father Bill shared to help to prepare a witness, and the process of helping to build engagement in the parish, and what are some of the strategies that parishes are using. Our CSEC team took the experience of many of the parishes that have been working with engagement and with strengths, and we've developed 2 implementation guides called Knowing and Leading. There's a Knowing and Leading Parishioner Engagement, and there's a Knowing and Leading Strengths guides. Those there is a cost for, and the cost for those guides helps to fund the CSEC site, because that site is not free. We're just kind of a fledgling little grassroots organization, so this is one of the ways that we're able to keep that site online. But what happens is you purchase 1 copy of the guide, and then you have permission to make as many copies as you need for your parish. So again, if you go to that CSEC site and in the search box just type Knowing and Leading, you'll find the link to be able to get those guides, and that will really give you a step-by-step process with samples. Many of them are from St. Gerard's and Father Bill, things that they've used over the years as they've grown engagement in their parish and as they've seen all of this take root. We again want to thank you, and we want to let you know that our next CSEC Live is not until August. We're taking July off. We know that many folks are going to be on vacation, and we decided perhaps that was a good thing. But we have a really special CSEC Live coming up on Friday, August 17th. Stephanie Moore and Sherry Waddell are going to be talking about spiritual gifts and natural talents, and how it's not an either or, it's an and more. Sherry is the co-founder of the Catherine of Siena Institute, which many of you know as the organization that created and sustains the Called and Gifted process. And then Stephanie is one of our founding team members for the Catholic Strengths and Engagement community, and she is trained in both strengths and Called and Gifted. So this is going to be a really special conversation that we hope many of you will join us for. And again, please join us at the Catholic Strengths and Engagement connected community. The address is right there at the top of your screen, and please share that with your friends and continue to be connected to us as we learn and grow together. Thanks so much, all of you, for your participation today, and we hope to see you again at CSEC Live and in all sorts of ways in the future. Thanks, and God bless.